All right, we are recording. Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today we have a very special guest in conjunction with our study of the Quiverfull movement. I have the very wonderful Vyckie Garrison here. She has a outreach to help people that are stuck in the movement or just coming out of the movement, and she herself escaped from the movement. So thought we would have her on to tell her story and maybe ask a few questions and get a better understanding from actually inside rather than just what I'm able to find out about with research. So thank you so much for coming on, Vyckie.
Oh, sure. It's good to talk with you, Tracy.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I guess we'll just start with your story. I think that's what everyone wants to hear. And anything you'd like to tell us, just feel free. You have the floor.
Okay. Well, my topic is Quiverfull. You talk about the movement, and it's really just a very narrowly focused Christian fundamentalist movement. And of course, it's a very broad topic. So I'll just give a very quick rundown of my involvement. I got involved um, when I was in my 20s. I had become a Christian. I was a born again Christian, but I was searching for like the exact right kind of Christian to because I had a lot at stake. I had grown up in a family with a pretty, dysfunctional background. And I had a little daughter who I hadn't planned on, but there she was. And I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to parent this child and give her, a good life, a good, happy, loving home? And so I just started looking, deeper and deeper. And I had started off in sort of the non-denominational, like word of faith, charismatic sort of churches, speaking in tongues, that kind of thing. But I gradually just got more and more conservative. And I ended up at an independent fundamental Baptist church. And it was really when I got into homeschooling. It kind of started homeschooling on a fluke. A friend had recommended that to me. And I went into it just like, I don't know. I don't think I can teach my own kid. I'm pretty sure I would suck at that. But I also felt that, if it was God's will, if that's what God really wanted me to do, then, of course I was going to. So, but the more that I got into the Christian homeschooling, that's where I encountered these materials that really teach the whole Quiverfull ideal. And that ideal is like this vision of this really godly Christian home. It's we called it being radically pro-life because, we were willing to accept God's will in every area of our lives, including reproductive decisions. And, at the time that was very hard for me because I had had, a very difficult pregnancy and delivery with my first child. And then, later I had two more kind of, they were, oops, I didn't mean to do that, but, but then we had them, and it was very difficult and it was life-threatening for me. I have a genetic bone condition that causes me to have, some real difficulties. And so that my doctor had said, no more, you have enough, don't do this anymore. But it was about that time that we were encountering all of this material saying, children are a blessing from the Lord. And of course, based on Psalm 123, where he says, like arrows in the hands of a mighty man, so are the children of one's youth. Blessed are they who have this quiver full of them. And that's where the term quiverfull comes from. And so, I really wanted to be just the very best Christian that I could because I felt like, there was a lot of stake that I really wanted to make a difference for my kids. And so even though it was difficult, like a personal sacrifice for me, we went ahead and made that choice to just put our reproductive choices and our reproductive life into God's hands, and that meant no birth control. So I have 7 children. 6 of them were born in 11 years. So it was very, boom, boom, boom. And it was very difficult. I mean, we thought that we were going down, the best path, the path that God wanted us to, raise these arrows for the Lord's army, that was, and if you think about it now, the arrows are the ammunition. So it was like we're breeding weapons for the holy war, which is like completely freaky, but at the time it sounded beautiful. It sounded inspiring. It was inspiring enough that I kept at it, even risking my life many times. My last one, I had a partial uterine rupture. I didn't wake up for a month. It was very difficult. But, the doctor had done the C-section. He delivered my baby, and then he spent like an hour or more stitching me all back together, put my womb back together. And then he's like, I really, really don't think you should keep doing this. I'm like, why'd you leave my womb if I'm not supposed to use it? And so I did get pregnant 2 more times, and I miscarried early, which I was like, and I felt guilty for being relieved, but at the same time, I had all these little baby children who needed a mom, and so I wanted to be around for that. So that was really how I got into it, my involvement. I was so convinced of the whole ideal that, and I'm a writer, so I did a lot of writing for the pro Quiverfull publications at the time. I wrote for Nancy Campbell and Salt Magazine and some of the others that were around at the time that were promoting the Quiverfull ideal. And so people knew who we were. They knew my story. And they were like inspired. I had people who would write to me and, or send me emails and say, I have this baby because I read your testimony. And so, I kind of, when I got to this point, and I think all Quiverfull moms eventually, sooner or later, get to this point where they realize that it's just unsustainable. You just can't keep that up. I mean, physical health goes down, just the sheer logistics of trying to manage, pregnancy after pregnancy. You're homeschooling them all. You're doing everything the hard way. It's just baking from scratch, and we didn't quite go as far as some of the couples that I knew. As far as the very back to basics lifestyle and stuff, but it was still, I had my own newspaper that I had started as a way to earn an income, because my husband at the time, he's blind, and he, had Social Security disability, but that's not enough if you're going to have, 7 kids. And so I had started a newspaper that I could publish from home. And that paper was based, really, it was like, we got our information from Focus on the Family Research Council, all of the really conservative Christian news sources. And it was very much based on our ideal of the Quiverfull lifestyle. And so I promoted that through our paper. And so I'm doing, publishing this paper, and I'm doing all of this. And after a while, it was just so overwhelming. And, I would have kept it up. I would have found a way to just because I definitely have this martyr mentality in which I will sacrifice. I can take, I'm tough. But after a while, I realized that my kids were not thriving. We saw the Duggar family. I was so inspired by them. I was like, oh, Michelle Duggar, she's actually doing what I want to, this is what my plan is. This is what my ideal is. And she was living it, and her kids, you know, they're just beautiful. They're just, you know, so happy and loving and kind and all of that. You know, of course, I only saw what I saw on TLC. You know, at that time it was like 14 and she's pregnant again or something.
Right.
But, you know, I would just remember thinking, wow, you know, she's really doing it. But that's not how my kids were taking it. My kids were not so accepting. They wanted to be normal. They didn't like being homeschooled, probably because, as I predicted, I sucked at homeschooling, but also just the social isolation. You know, they felt like freaks. They didn't like the gender roles. You know, I remember my second oldest daughter, she was reading Above Ruby's magazine when it came, and I always, you know, was so looking forward to Nancy Campbell's magazine. It was so inspiring. You know, these Proverbs 31 women and all of their babies, and they're all so beautiful. And I would grab it and I would just read it, you know, all these, and I was just inspired. I was soaking it up. Well, my second oldest daughter, Berea, she got a hold of it and she's reading it. She's like, why do these women like having babies? And why do they, you know, she's like, I just don't like it. I was like, you know, why don't you guys get it? Why don't you? And, you know, for them, they didn't want to be always wearing dresses. They didn't want to, I mean, we didn't even have a television. We didn't allow even Disney movies. You know, all of that was just out of the question for us. And my kids, they just, and it was more than that. It was more than just the lifestyle, but the way that it changed our family dynamics, because there's such an emphasis on patriarchy. I mean, we actually subscribed to literally Patriarch magazine. And, you know, my husband, he was blind, of course, so he couldn't read it. So I ordered the audio version for him. So every month, you know, he'd get this tape in the mail of, you know, these patriarchs telling you how to lead your family in the biblical way. But what it did was really made him so, he really got this idea of his own self-importance. You know, he really felt like he was, you know, responsible, eternally responsible for the spiritual well-being of his family, for me and for the children. And so he took that really, really seriously. You know, he really felt the weight of that responsibility. And so he was just like, had to be on top of everything to make sure that we were not straying from the path, that we had the right thoughts. And, you know, it was just, it became very oppressive. And the more that the kids, you know, kind of balked at that, because they had their own opinions, they had their own even preferences for, you know, just any little thing. And if it disagreed in the slightest, he was on them. And it became a very oppressive. And then it's, you know, after a while, it just became abusive. And so when I saw how all that was going down, I was just like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not, you know, everything didn't have to be perfect and rosy. We didn't have to have the Garden of Eden in our home. But we also didn't have to have kids who just hated their lives, who were miserable, who were depressed. And so I was just like, this, you know, something's not right, because I'm doing everything, you know. I'm just like, I'm putting my life on the line here and not holding anything back. I'm not in any way, you know, trying to, I don't know, like, have my own will. Everything was God's will. Everything was God's will. And yet for my family to be so unhappy, it's just like, something is off. Something is not, and so it got me questioning. And about that time, I had an opportunity to talk with my uncle, who I had never known. You know, I met him online. Well, I had met my dad, and then I found out I had a chance to meet my uncle. And my dad, when I told him, you know, I'm going to go to Arkansas, I'm going to see, you know, my uncles and my grandma, and he's like, well, you need to be careful about your Uncle Ron because he's not a Christian and he's kind of tricky and he's going to try to confuse you.
I'm that aunt in my family.
Right. And I was just like, not worried in the least. It's like, if anything, he's going to meet a true Christian finally. And he's going to see, that he's wrong and that God is real, which is not how it worked out. It worked out that, like, I really liked him. And I started just emailing back and forth with him. And it was this opportunity for me because, when you're in the lifestyle, you have no time to think. I thought I was thinking, but it was like, it's very confined in what I was thinking about. I was thinking about homeschooling. I was thinking about discipline. I was thinking about, just all of the acceptable, topics that come up in the Quiverfull life. And I really was just so consumed with all of that. And I hadn't really had a chance to think about why we were doing what we were doing for a long time. I mean, that had already been settled, years past. And so now I was just living it. But then here's this break where, I meet my Uncle Ron and he's like, I really was impressed with your family. I feel like you're being very intentional. You're very countercultural. I'd like to get to know you better. So I'm writing to him and I'm trying to explain to him why we're doing the things we're doing, the way we're doing them. But I knew he didn't accept the Bible as an authority, so I couldn't quote chapter and verse to him. And so I'm trying to kind of get out of that authoritative, here's why we do it, God says, blah, blah, and say, okay, here's the real rational, scientific, whatever. I didn't even know any of that really at the time. But I was like, okay, I have to be able to explain this. And the more that I tried, the deeper I had to dig into trying to, make reasonable sense of all of it. And it didn't take me very long. There was a few months period where I was just studying like crazy. I read so much. The internet was fairly new, and I was reading articles online, and I was getting books from Amazon and reading all of this stuff and just thinking and thinking. And it didn't take me very long before I thought, this actually, if you don't appeal to the Bible, if you don't quote scrap chapter and verse, it actually doesn't make sense. And it's actually kind of twisted. And so, I got to this point where I just realized that I did not believe enough of the Bible and Christianity to be able to call myself a Christian. And I was like, oh, yikes, because I just seriously built my life around this whole thing. It was all faith-based. It was all about Jesus. And, even the way we earned a living with the Christian newspaper, everything depended on Jesus. And all of a sudden I'm just like, yeah, I don't really go for this Jesus guy anymore.
Wow.
So that was what, started my, I got out. As soon as I realized that I didn't believe in the Bible, that I didn't call myself Christian, well then that whole God hates divorce thing didn't really make much difference to me either. And I'm like, if it wasn't for Christianity, if it wasn't for faith, I would not have stayed with this guy because he's annoying. And he's, and he's difficult to be around, and it's just like constant conflict. And so I was like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And I put my kids in public school. That was a big decision for me, which was one of the best decisions. And then, looking back, I really regret homeschooling my kids. I wish I never would have went down that path. But because I wouldn't have as many of them as I do if I hadn't. But yeah, I just changed everything. But through all that process, I kind of felt like, because I had been an advocate, a vocal advocate for the Quiverfull lifestyle, I kind of felt like I needed to explain to people, when people say I have 7 children where I would have only had 2 because I read your information and I got, you got me into this. And so that I felt that responsibility of being, I needed to explain what was going on, what was I thinking. And so I just started writing a blog, No Longer Quivering. And it was just, basically like a way for me to process, here's what I was thinking, this is why it made sense, etc. And I didn't really think anyone would pay any attention to it. I kind of hoped that some of the people that I had, influenced before, that they might read some of it. It was kind of like a forbidden thing, though, because they knew that I had lost my faith. And, one of my friends who had written, who was a publisher of Salt Magazine, she wrote a blog post after she heard, and she was like, my friend died. She was talking about me. It's just it was a spiritual death, which is the most grievous death of all. And I read that, and I was like, I feel really good, actually.
Feel good for a dead person.
Yeah. So that's how it started. And it started off, just a slow thing, but I don't know. There's so much, like, everything that's wrong in the world as far as patriarchy goes, it is so magnified in the Quiverfull movement. It's just like patriarchy on steroids. And so, of course, women are going to, even if they didn't go that far in their own life, they're going to relate, and they're going to see, where this is creeping in their own lives. And they're just like, yeah, I get that. And so I guess that was the appeal. And before you know it, it was just like took off. And then I started hearing from some of these women, Quiverfull women, who I had known and had been interacting with, during my Quiverfull time. And they come and they just start reading, and at first they're just like really defensive, but after a while it's just like, this isn't working out that well for me either. And so we kind of formed this support group of women just helping each other to think this through and to figure out what's going on, what's the, how do we live now? And through that, it became like this movement, and it's way beyond No Longer Quivering now. There's, the survivors movement of women who are just saying, no, this is harmful to my children. I mean, we get into it for the sake of our children, but when we see what it's doing, we get out for the same reason. This is not good for them, and we've got to find a different way. So there, I just went. Meh.
No, it's fine. I'm enjoying it. I know everyone's enjoying it. Of the women that have left the movement, do most of them, like yourself, do it in sort of an agnostic atheist path, or do some of them just become like Methodist or just a contemporary?
It's a mixture. And to be honest, when I first realized I didn't believe in the inerrant, infallible Bible, Word of God thing, I scrambled trying to find something they could hold on to that I could say, this at least is still true. And I did a ton of reading, ton of research, and I'm looking at like liberal theology. I was looking at like quantum theory, feminist spirituality, just all of this stuff, and trying to see, it's got to be, just a little, there's got to be something. I didn't waste my whole, efforts and sacrifice my life for something that's just like all in my head. It was hard to kind of come to, but once you kick that, foundation out from under you, which was the solid rock of the Word of God, then nothing else resonated. None of it made sense. And after a while, it's like, it's all bullshit. And
Right.
I think that happens pretty often. We don't go into, when we're talking with Quiverfull moms and saying, this is why it didn't work for us, this is the problems we had. We don't go into it with like, and let's turn you into an atheist at all. I mean, we're fine. They can have their faith that that's what keeps them going, because you need some kind of strength to, keep on with so many kids and so many responsibilities. So we don't try that. But like I said, the Quiverfull ideal is just so comprehensive, and it affects every little thing. I mean, down to your washing of dishes or changing a baby's diaper. Everything is just all wrapped up in that whole spiritual concept. And once you it's like putting a pinprick in a balloon, and like, boom, it's gone. And so it's pretty common that the women, they'll just be like, nah, forget it. And they do most of the time come around to being either, agnostic, or at the very least, a very much more
Like a theist.
Liberal,
Yeah.
theistic kind of belief. Yeah.
Right. Well, great thing about my channel, my subscribers are a mixture of all religions and atheists. Everybody knows I'm an atheist. I tell them that when I come at religion, I come at it from an atheistic view. So I'm very thankful for your honesty here. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Well, Atheist of the Year here. So that was a while ago. But I mean, it was kind of I don't know, an example of the extremism of I kind of have this, I'm all in, whatever I do. And so I went from, Christian Family of the Year in 2003 to 2004 and Atheist of the Year.
Right. Well, one thing I found, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
One thing I found so interesting about the whole Quiverfull movement is that it's, you first hear it and you think that's got to be like a denomination or a cult or a sect within itself. But when you delve into it, it's not. It's like a life philosophy is a good way to be, because when I got into it, I couldn't find like one singled out denomination. I found a lot of independent Baptist churches, like you said, that kind of assigned to that. Then you get into like Stephen Anderson, who's
right,
whacked, and then you get into the Institute for Biblical Life Principles, which seems to control all the homeschooling materials.
Oh yeah, the only
Goddard.
reason Gothard is because we couldn't afford it. But that was like the gold standard. If I always felt like if my kid had done that, then maybe my kids would have been like on board with it. But since we couldn't afford it, we just were, I don't know. And yeah, it is hard to define because, so many people want to, especially the Christians, they will just want to say, well, that was some extremist cult, and that is not Christianity. That is not, that's not really what the Bible teaches. That's not really God's will. And so, obviously you were deceived. And the thing about it, like you say, you find it in every denomination. And that's because every foundational principle in Quiverfull comes straight from the Bible, chapter and verse. There's nothing that the Quiverfull, they do not have a single distinctive doctrine. There's nothing in Quiverfull that the average evangelical who goes to, whether it's a Pentecostal or a Word of Faith, or even the liberal like Salvation Army, which they're not that liberal, but for us they were very liberal. They
like
were
an Episcopalian or a Methodist,
like barely Christian.
Yeah.
But no, any of these, you talk to those families, those people who are believers, and maybe they're just like very lukewarm, as we would have described them. But you ask them, do you believe that children are a blessing from the Lord? And nobody's going to say no. Do you believe do you believe that, a wife is supposed to submit to her husband? I mean, what are you going to say to that? Because they believe it. They do believe it. I talked to my pastor friend of mine. She's a lieutenant in the Salvation Army. She's higher up than that at this point, but this was years ago. She was a lieutenant. Her husband is also a lieutenant. And we used to have coffee together and talk about, just all of these different things. And I said, well, don't you believe that, the husband is the head of the house, right? And she's like, yeah, of course. That's what the Bible teaches. I was like, okay, so what does that mean? Like in practicality, like, do you ask his permission before you make decisions? She's like, no. You have to get his, does he control the checkbook? Does he control the finances? She's like, no. She's like, no, I basically do what I want. And I'm like, so, okay, so it doesn't actually mean anything in practicality, but you still believe it. She's like, yes, she did believe it, that the husband is the head of the house. The thing that makes the difference between your average Christian and a Quiverfull family is that they put it into practice. They actually do it. So everything that the Bible teaches, which is all based on patriarchy, it's all based on hierarchy, everything that is just your basic biblical family values, those things that are being pushed by Focus on the Family, Vision Forum, all of the policy makers in Washington who are Republicans and who are saying, this is, good basic biblical family values. If they actually live it out, that's Quiverfull. So that's why you can find it in any denomination.
So I know that you and your children got out. Is your ex-husband still kind of in it? Did he remarry maybe and do it again, or?
He didn't remarry. I think for a long time he was hoping that, the Holy Spirit would get a hold of me and I'd come back or whatever. And I think the Atheist of the Year maybe was a point where it's like, okay, that's
not gonna happen.
But I don't really have any contact with him, and my kids don't very much either. So, but he's still a Christian. He's still very, listens to Rush Limbaugh. That's the word.
If you had remained in the Quiverfull, and were your children, like, if they had gone off and became like a normie, for lack of a better word, and just went out, was like a liberal Christian or even an atheist, or just, and didn't live the same type of life, like they had a modern, normal 2 kids limit type of modern life, would that have caused you guys to kind of shun them or turn away from them, or does that differ?
I think that I personally would have shunned my kids because it started when they got into their teens and early 20s. That's when my kids were starting to really rebel, and by that I mean they just weren't overly enthusiastic about the lifestyle and about the whole mindset, and it didn't make me think, oh, my children are flawed or evil, or in some way there's something wrong with them. I think because I've always, I care about children, and that was what my heart was like. I just want a good life for them. I want everything. I want them to be happy, and when they weren't, rather than shunning them or saying, well, there's something wrong with you, something wrong with your faith, I question my faith. I question, something's not right with this way of thinking.
But are there families within the movement that you knew that do turn their backs on children, that go the other way once they're grown?
I'm sure it happens. I personally can't think of, well, I guess, now that I've been out of it and I've heard stories, and I've heard that it happens, but I didn't know anyone personally.
All right. Well, that's actually pretty relieving. I know, because when
no, it's I think that people have these ideas, like, especially if you're looking at the stars of the Quiverfull movement, the Duggar family or the Andersons or whatever, and you think,
Yeah.
you know, they're just in it all for themselves. They're just in it for their own glory. They're in it for their own, you know, ego or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I don't know, I can't judge their motives, but I think that the majority of Christian parents who go down that path are sincerely doing what they think is right in the eyes of God for their children. They're doing it
Yeah.
for their children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think, did you ever use like the Michael Pearl books when it came to parenting? Did you ever turn that way? I found so much information on so many things.
Oh my
I
God.
actually read the Michael Pearl book for a book review I'm doing in conjunction with this
To train
episode.
up a child.
Yeah,
I read it and I was mortified. And I'll
yeah.
tell you, I felt at the time that was like God's protecting me from that teaching, because when I had my fourth child, she was I had a really difficult pregnancy and delivery, and it was just like, it was like torture for 9 months and then another year to recover. It was bad. But I had a real problem with breastfeeding my first three. And because I wasn't using birth control, this was at the point where I was like, no more birth control. I really didn't want to get pregnant again right away. And so I was like, I really need this breastfeeding to work. So I started going to La Leche League to get some tips on how to make, you know, do the breastfeeding right. And I ran into these moms who were into Dr. Sears, the attachment parenting. And because I had that in my mind, like, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a conflict. It doesn't have to be a power thing between you and your kid. And so I very much embraced that parenting style. And so then when I encountered, you know, we went to this home church where they loved Michael Pearl. They even sponsored him to come and do a workshop and everything. And I didn't go. I just like, no, this is, it was something that, you know, when I read about how he said, put your kid's favorite piece of fruit or, you know, something delicious that they want to eat, put it on the tray. And this is for infants, you know, put it on their tray. And then when they go to reach for it, you smack their hand, and you do that until you train them to ask. You know, they need to look to you, to the parent, and when you say yes, then it's okay for the child to take that. And that was the sort of training. And I was like, no, that sounds terrible. That sounds like,
Wow. Yeah, I was mortified by the book, but it just kept popping up. Everything I read or watched about Quiverfull, that book kept popping up, as did the Gothard stuff.
yeah,
So I delved into
the whole
that.
idea of breaking their spirit, you know, breaking their will, break their
Right.
will. And yeah, that was something that I just never, I don't know. Like I said, you know, when you really feel like you value children, and you know that you have that love for the children, then something like that is just going to be like, no. And I think that happens quite a bit with the Quiverfull families, even though they have these materials, these training materials. And yes, there are families where they implement that because they believe that that is God's will, but I don't think any of them really like resonate with it. Maybe they do. I can't judge all parents. I know.
Right.
I like it. It like when they say this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. It's because they actually don't want to do it. They don't actually want to beat their children or, you know, break their will or whatever. They just feel like that's what they have to do because that's what the Bible says.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's the same with every teaching in Quiverfull. There's like so many things that you really don't want to do. I really didn't want to keep having C-sections. I really didn't want to keep, you know, just bruising my body with all of the extremes that I was subjecting it to. I didn't want to do that, but I did it. Yeah.
Well, I thank you for coming on today. You've been very, very, very informative, and I really appreciate it. And tell people where they can find you. Tell them where if they are trying to come out of this movement themselves, where they can find information to kind of help them do that.
The website, if you type in No Longer Quivering, you'll come up with a website. It's being hosted on Patheos. And I do not have anything to do with the daily running of the website anymore. I turned that over to another former Quiverfull mom who is doing a fantastic job with it.
Okay.
But as far as me, I'm No Quivering on Twitter, or you can find me on Facebook. And yeah, there's just so many great support resources out there now that I'm really, it's great that it's blown up enough that, you can type in the search terms if you're a Quiverfull Christian and you want to find out information on homeschooling, or you want to find out information on a specific, trusting the Lord with your family. And because the internet, there's just so much information out there now that you're going to hear alternative views. You're going to hear people saying, hey, maybe you should just think twice about this. Maybe you should take a little caution. You type in the pearls, train up a child, whatever, and they're going to have a very good likelihood that they're going to come across some very detailed criticisms that are going to make those people stop and say, maybe, and that's not to say that am I running out of time?
No,
okay.
not at all.
Okay, so that's not to say that I think Quiverfull is going away. I mean, yes, there's more information out there. There's more people who are former Quiverfull families who are saying, this is not right. They're sounding the warnings, especially the kids. The kids grow up and they're like, oh my God, you would not believe the way I was raised. It's happening. But this is not to say that it's going away, because the way, America has become so divisive and so divided and so scary. I'm just going to say it's scary.
Yeah, it is.
Especially if you're a Christian and you believe in biblical family values, and you see the way that the world's going now, and you're seeing that it's not even considered even questionable to be gay or to use birth control. All of these things that most people would be like, it used to be you didn't even want to have a tattoo because somebody's going to judge you, and everybody had to be all upstanding. And there's just not even really most people think nothing of it now. Yeah. And so because of that, if you're still a Christian and you're believing this biblical family values, and you see the way things are going, you're just going to be like freaked out.
I think it's
the end of the world.
Anybody.
This is the end times, and everything is just so like Satan's taken over. And so what are you going to do? You're going to scramble to your Bible. You're going to scramble to those resources. And that's what's happening. I think people are really panicking because they feel like, Satan is winning. And that's when they start like, okay, I'm going to protect my kids from, the godless institution, which is public school, and I'm going to homeschool. And we're going to be, we're going to shelter our kids from that dangerous environment of humanism.
Yeah, so, I think you're exactly right. And
so the homeschooling, Christian homeschooling is growing, and as long as that is still, as long as people are flocking to that that area, that's where they're going to encounter it, and that's why Quiverfull is growing. It is.
Well, but speaking of what you were saying about seeing legitimate criticisms of like the Pearl book and even the Gothard, because I know he got slapped with some sexual improprieties, and that doesn't seem to have dissuaded people from buying his, programs. But Susanna Anderson, I think it's pronounced Susanna, Stephen Anderson's wife, I somehow stumbled onto her YouTube channel when I was doing research, and she has like this in-depth review of the Michael Pearl to Train Up a Child book where she just rips it apart. So when you were saying criticism,
Right.
you're surprised where that will come from, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, yeah. And honestly, I think that more of the patriarchal men in the
Mhm.
Quiverfull families are going to be more persuaded by Michael Pearl's approach. And
Mm.
I think the mothers, it just, you know, they have their reservations for sure,
Yeah.
if not outright criticism, because
Oh, she did.
it's
She had sticky
you
notes.
can't have that many babies. They're just so, you're just like, no, I'm not going to smack my baby.
Yeah. That was kind of, and I was just shocked because I figured she was just going to give this glowing review of it, but no, she ripped him apart and called him a false prophet and all this stuff. I'm like, wow, there's some feud between the
Yeah.
Andersons and the Pearls going on.
I wonder what her husband has to say about it though. He's probably more on board. He's probably like, we got to be a man. Yeah,
Probably.
men of them.
Well, she promoted like one of his sermons in it where he like she seemed to think that this Michael Pearl was promoting something in Rome, like Romans 7, where they said you could achieve perfection, no sin, and that Michael Pearl seems to think you can lead children that way. And then she like said, but my husband ripped that whole principle apart in this sermon, and then I tried to go watch the sermon and it was made private. So
Uh,
anyway,
yeah.
but
Yeah, they're an interesting couple for sure.
for sure. They scare me as a gay person, as a lesbian. They definitely scare me. So it's
Yeah. Yeah.
whew. But I'm glad there are rational people out there like you that are fighting against this and spreading the good information. So I really appreciate everything you do. I especially appreciate you taking so much time with us today. And
Oh,
uh,
it's no problem. I've been quarantining, since March.
we have to.
So,
I live
but
near Nashville, Tennessee, and we tried to come out of it, then got locked down again when the COVID cases started to spike again. So we're right back.
yeah, yep. Well, we're living in interesting times, and I know it's always been that way.
Mm.
Everyone's living in interesting times, but this feels somehow kind of different to me. I don't know.
It is. I think we're going to come out of it in a totally different way. I mean, I don't think society's ever going to be quite the same. I think a lot of things like education and even work, a lot of work's going to be virtual now as a
Yeah.
result of this because people see it now. Oh, it can work and it can save money.
And so it's times like this where, there is a lot of fear and there is a
Hmm.
lot of, people going, help, where do I look to? What do I do? And so they get into the spirituality and that leads them to Christianity
Yeah.
and then,
I can see with all the homeschooling going on how the Quiverfull people like Gothard's people could be jumping on this to sell more
right,
programs and get more people in.
right. Because most of the, if you're not doing your homeschooling through a public school online curriculum, if you're trying to go out on your own, what you're going to find most of the time is fundamentalist Christian, um, even their math and their science, history, all of that. A lot of it is coming from the major Christian homeschool publishers,
Hmm.
and so that's another concern that that because you just dip a toe in and it's like it's quicksand because you just get sucked into this quagmire of biblical family values that just takes you down and down and down that rabbit hole. And so
For sure.
it does concern me at this time when people are homeschooling their children and there's just that fear out there. Um, so we'll see
I
how
can
it
and I can
goes.
I can see how someone can fall into that trap. And my wife and I, we don't have children, but if we did and wanted to, we would probably want to homeschool. Um, and my wife is a theist. I'm an atheist, and we're politically centrist. So I can see even with everything that we know, it would be hard. It would be easy to get sucked into that rabbit hole, thinking, well, what is public versus private teaching? So I can see how there's a lot of vulnerable people out there that can fall victim to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, Vicki, thank you so much for your time today.
No,
And
of course.
Have a wonderful, wonderful day.